My name is Carrie Walker, and I'll be taking you through the Village's Health presentation on effective communication with someone with dementia. Please keep in mind that this presentation is designed for educational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from a healthcare professional. It's my hope by the end of this presentation, you'll have a better understanding of how dementia affects a person's ability to communicate, how to decode verbal and behavioral messages delivered by someone with dementia, and to be able to respond in ways that are helpful to them. And lastly, I hope that you'll have new principles and practical techniques that will help you in communicating with someone with dementia. Before we go into understanding communication, I wanted to address one of the most common questions about Alzheimer's and dementia, and that is, what's the difference? Is Alzheimer's disease the same as dementia? The answer is that dementia is an umbrella term. It's not a diagnosis in and of itself. That's why it's extremely important to get an actual diagnosis of what type of dementia your loved one may have. Looking over at the right side of this umbrella are reversible conditions: depression, drug interactions, nutritional deficiencies such as B12, thyroid disease, and infections such as a urinary tract infection can all cause symptoms of dementia. Over on the left side of the umbrella, however, are irreversible types, Alzheimer's being the most common, accounting for 2/3 of all cases of dementia. Each of those listed on the irreversible side of the umbrella do have different presentations. So again, it's very important to get a proper diagnosis so you can better anticipate the changes and know how to meet your loved one's needs. So the answer to the question is Alzheimer's is a type of dementia, similar to saying that breast cancer is a type of cancer. I'd like to show you this video clip because I think it will give you a better perspective on what changes are occurring in your loved one's brain, giving you a better frame of reference about what's possible for them to change and what's not. Just in case the quality of the video isn't so good that you can make out some of the information that you're hearing, I've listed the website down below for you to reference afterwards. This particular website has very convenient, easy to understand animated videos that help you better just understand the disease, and it's a great resource that you can share with others.
What is Alzheimer's disease? Alzheimer's is a slow, fatal disease of the brain, affecting 1 in 10 people over the age of 65. No one is immune. The disease comes on gradually as 2 abnormal protein fragments, called plaques and tangles, accumulate in the brain and kill brain cells. They start here in the hippocampus, part of the brain where memories are first formed. Over many years' time, the plaques and tangles slowly destroy the hippocampus, and it becomes harder and harder to form new memories. Simple recollections from a few hours or days ago that the rest of us might take for granted are just not there. After that, more plaques and tangles spread into different regions of the brain, killing cells and compromising function wherever they go. This spreading around is what causes the different stages of Alzheimer's. From the hippocampus, the disease spreads here to the region of the brain where language is processed. When that happens, it gets tougher and tougher to find the right word. Next, the disease creeps toward the front of the brain, where logical thought takes place. Very gradually, a person begins to lose the ability to solve problems, grasp concepts, and make plans. Next, the plaques and tangles invade the part of the brain where emotions are regulated. When this happens, the patient gradually loses control over moods and feelings. After that, the disease moves to where the brain makes sense of things it sees, hears, and smells, At this stage, Alzheimer's wreaks havoc on a person's senses and can spark hallucinations. Eventually, the plaques and tangles erase a person's oldest and most precious memories, which are stored here in the back of the brain. Near the end, the disease compromises a person's balance and coordination. And in the very last stage, it destroys the part of the brain that regulates breathing and the heart. The progression from mild forgetting to death is slow and steady and takes place over an average of 8 to 10 years. It is relentless and, for now, incurable. Helping your family, friends, and neighbors to better understand Alzheimer's will reduce stigma, improve care, and even help the fight for a cure.
I hope that that video clip gives you a better perspective on what's happening with your loved one when they are doing something that just doesn't make sense to you. It clearly is not a choice. So in summary, what changes in a person's brain when they have a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's disease? Memory is one of the biggest areas. We say that if you've met one person with Alzheimer's disease, you've met one person with Alzheimer's disease, because our brains are all different. Different areas of our brains may be more developed than others, depending on the job that we did most of our lives, or if we've had any injury to different parts of our brain. But the disease does follow a pattern that begins destroying the part of the brain responsible for short-term memory, called the hippocampus. And as it progresses out to the different areas, as the video clip intimated, there's different symptoms. With memory, I want to make a point that memory is more than just knowledge of our relationships and who people are and the experiences that we've had with them. Memory is knowledge of everything that we do. Think about getting dressed in the morning. You didn't hesitate to put your clothing on in a particular order because you knew, you learned at some point and knew at this point that your underwear go underneath the rest of your clothing, not on top. But this is a memory. Knowledge of how to make a sandwich and the order in which you put the condiments on is a memory. Knowledge of how to drive a car, that's also a memory. So when these memories are being compromised, the person is not going to be able to do them. This might account for a person's lack of action when you ask them to do something. For example, if you ask them to wash their clothes or wash these potatoes in the sink, getting them ready for dinner, and they just stand there and look at you, it may be because they're not quite sure what that means. It may also have to do with the fact that their brain's ability to understand language and to communicate effectively what they're understanding and what they're thinking is compromised. If a person is unable to find the word to describe things or the words to ask for what they need, they will get very frustrated and may choose not to act at all. Executive functions refer to functions that are controlled in the front part of our brain, such as planning, reasoning, judgment, sequencing, all very important in terms of navigating our day and remembering the steps in different individual tasks. Visual spatial perception is also altered, which can impair a person's balance. Behavior, as the video clip mentioned, becomes compromised. Another reason for that, in addition to that part of the brain being affected, is the frontal part of the brain, which is responsible for all of our filters and knowledge of social mores and of what to say and what not to say, becomes compromised. And when those filters are impaired, the emotion is left largely to just be expressed. There's no filters about what should be said and not be said if a person's frustrated. I like to show this slide to further reinforce that any change in behavior or difficulty that you're having communicating with the person with Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia is not a choice. The left side of this slide is a healthy older adult brain. The section that is shown on the right side is a person's brain if they have advanced Alzheimer's. I do want to emphasize that this represents a brain with advanced Alzheimer's disease. This is not in the early stages. This could be down the line, year 8, 10, depending, but this does not happen overnight. So I don't want to scare you, but I want you to remember this slide. If you are caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease and are getting very, very frustrated, remember this picture in your brain to remind yourself that their behavior is not their own choice and we have to adjust. Given all that's happening in a person's brain and how it's affected by dementia, it wouldn't be surprising that there could be some communication breakdowns that are almost unavoidable unless you have knowledge of how this disease is affecting their brain. I want you to think about, in general, when you are trying to have a conversation with someone, what happens when communication breaks down? How do you feel? Do you feel frustrated? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel angry when what you're saying is not being interpreted correctly by the person that you're trying to have a conversation with? Then think about, how do you think a person with dementia feels when their ability to communicate is compromised a larger and larger majority of the time? It's often said that dementia is a disease of emotions. Many times a person with dementia is in a state of confusion. Either they're not able to interpret what's happening around them, they're forgetting steps in a part of a familiar task, they're not being interpreted correctly. They're often in a state of confusion. When we're in a state of confusion, we're generally not comfortable. And when we're not comfortable, we don't have our best behavior on display. As an example, I want you to think about if you were if you were on your way to a surprise birthday party for a friend. You're looking desperately for directions and you know that you have to be at this birthday party on time, otherwise you run the risk of spoiling the surprise because you'll be seen. So as you look at your watch, you're getting increasingly anxious because it's getting closer to the time that you're supposed to be there and you still cannot find the house. In that moment, your daughter calls on the phone, on your cell phone, wanting to say hello because she hasn't seen you for a while. How might you be likely to answer that phone call from your daughter? You might not answer it in the best tone of voice. You might be a little frustrated. It doesn't have anything to do with her call. It's just that she caught you at a bad time. This would explain how someone with Alzheimer's might be reacting. They're confused, they feel uncomfortable, and they have probably some behavior of agitation or anxiousness that would be easily explained by what we just went through in the previous slides. Given all that's happening to someone's brain when they have dementia, they are not usually able to make a change. It's up to us to adapt our approach. If we are able to respond to someone with dementia differently by being very flexible and going with the flow, perhaps entering their reality, we can largely prevent and reduce the symptoms of behavior change. If we are able to figure out what they need from us, what they need for themselves, or just to not respond in a way that escalates feelings more, a lot of the symptoms of changes in behavior associated with with dementia can largely be prevented. And that's great news. Principles of communication to keep in mind are, it's important to understand what's not possible to change. If your loved one has a chronic disease affecting their brain's ability to work normally, there's going to be things that you're not able to change. Relationships and ways to communicate will need to be changed. Remember that each person is a composite of their thoughts, beliefs, and actions of how they grew up. And all All of this will come into play when they're being affected by this disease. Each person will respond differently because they're a different person. Remember that all behavior has meaning. No one woke up one day and decided to be difficult or decided to be problematic or agitated. Typically, when this disease begins to impact a person's ability to communicate, they may increasingly have to rely on behavior as a means to let you know what they might need or what's happening or that they are having a problem. Lastly, remember that connecting always overrides the task. I like to remind people that I don't think there's ever been a time when someone died because they didn't have a shower or didn't shave in the morning. Personal hygiene is important, but if a person is becoming so frustrated at you when you're trying to get them into the shower or to simply help them shave their beard in the morning or their legs, it's best to take a step back and remember that the relationship is more important and that you can always circle back later and when the person's more comfortable. Some of the benefits of effective communication are that the person with dementia will keep their self-esteem. They'll feel comfortable and safe continuing to try to do things on their own. They will be less frustrated, and you'll be less frustrated because you will take a step back and not have to be right and realize and reprioritize the critical and most important things. This will help strengthen their independence and greatly enhance the relationship the two of you have. Next, we're going to walk through steps to effective communication when you're working with someone, a friend or family member that has dementia. The first step is check the environment. We all respond to our environment on a sometimes hourly basis without realizing it. If the room becomes too cool, we put on a sweater. If it becomes too hot, we take off the sweater. If we're thirsty, we get a drink of water. If it's too bright, we draw the blinds. If it's too noisy, we move to a different room. But when a person has dementia, they may not be able to adjust to their environment. And this is important for you to remember because you will have to step in and maybe make some of those adjustments for them. For example, if your spouse loves to be outside and listening to the birds, and you put that person outside and they seem to be enjoying it, remember that the position of the sun might change, and now all of a sudden they're very hot out there and be growing very agitated. Or someone may be watching TV and the program on the TV has changed and now it's something violent that's creating a lot of agitation on their part. They're not able to get up and change that TV program. So that's something you may have to do for them. Go into detective mode and see if there's anything in their immediate environment which can be causing distress if you see a change in behavior. Before we go on to our second step in effective communication, I want to give you a little bit of a quiz. How much of how we are understood by others depends on our choice of words? What do you think? Oftentimes, if you're like me, we put a lot of emphasis on the choice of words. However, let's take a look. Turns out that 50% of how we're understood is dependent on our body language. 38% is tone of voice, and only 7% is our choice of words. That's actually great information when we're working to communicate with someone with dementia, because largely we need to rely on our body language, tone of voice, and nonverbal communication. We need to adjust our approach. Think ahead. If a person's having a tough day, have some ideas in mind of some things that can redirect their attention if they're getting distracted or agitated. Think ahead of activities that person might enjoy during your day. These things are hard to think about in the moment, but if you know that you need some quiet time to pay the bills and your loved one may get agitated during the day, it would be helpful if you thought ahead about some things that might occupy his or her time. so that you could have your quiet time necessary to pay bills. Remember, since this disease affects a person's ability to understand language, give simple instructions, short sentences. Make sure to ask one question at a time. Be mindful of facial expressions and body language. As we just found out in the previous slide, your choice of words will have less of an impact on the person than your body language or nonverbal communication. Make sure to give yourself plenty of time for activities of care or to move from one activity to another so that you don't get impatient. Even if your words are kind, if your body language betrays impatience because you're crossing your arms or your tone of voice is sharp, your person with dementia is going to pick up on that and not be so likely to move ahead with things that you're suggesting that they do. The third step in effective communication is making a connection with that person. Dementia can affect the person's ability to concentrate or to stay focused. Establishing eye contact can be helpful. Something else I'd like you to bring to your attention is as the Alzheimer's progresses, a person's field of vision becomes more downward and they lose their peripheral vision. So make sure that when you're approaching them, approach from the front. Give them time to register that you're in front of them and that you are trying to make a connection with them so you don't startle them. Depending on if they're comfortable, you can use touch and gestures. But again, make sure the person is aware that you're in front of them or nearby so that you don't startle them. Use a calm voice. Remember, tone of voice accounts for 38% of a person's ability to understand what you're asking of them. Speak simply and slowly. Number 4, be a good listener. Based on the slides and the video clip that we saw earlier, we should understand the person's ability to take in information and to process what you're asking of them becomes impaired. It may take them longer to express what they're trying to tell you. They might not even be aware that they're choosing some of the wrong words. Use the skills listed here, the steps listed here, to show that you're listening to them and what they're saying is important to you. Expressed interest. Don't interrupt. Focus on their feelings and be patient. Just when you've thought you've been patient enough, count to 10 and give yourself a few more seconds before responding. Don't cut them off. They'll get even more frustrated and less likely to even try to communicate. Again, connecting always overrides the task. The 5th step is to focus on remaining skills. Match activities to their current abilities or right-size the activity. People want to be able to enjoy the things that they like to enjoy. They don't want to necessarily have to do other things that they've never liked just because they can't do the things that they want to do. For example, if a person is an avid golfer but can no longer golf, you may want to consider taking them on the golf cart. Perhaps they can get off at the hole and just putt. Maybe you can alert that person's friends that that person isn't able to play a full 9 holes of golf. Would it be okay if they just played 7 and rode along for the next 2 holes? Right-sizing the activity can make a big difference as to whether someone will get frustrated. Continuing the example of golf, give praise and compliments. Everyone likes a compliment, especially when someone has dementia. They're feeling a little bit insecure and usually know that they're not able to do what they used to be able to do. So encourage that independence by complimenting and praising what they are able to do. And also don't ask them to do things that they can't do. Think ahead about how you can right-size something. Everybody wants to feel that they have a sense of purpose. So for example, if your wife can no longer cook the meal, she could probably help you set the table, or maybe she could help stir something. So think ahead about what components or portions of activities can that person still do so they're connected and stay with you. These are the do's and don'ts of effective communication with someone with memory loss. When you look at the don'ts, reasoning, don't argue and confront, don't remind, don't question recent memory. The reasoning and reminding are something that we typically tend to do with people that are have their cognition intact. For example, if I had a lunch date with someone and I didn't show up, that person would probably call me and remind me, don't you remember? And I would probably say, oh my goodness, that's right. But if I don't remember and I'm forgetting that I forgot, I would probably feel very uncomfortable. And the more the person tried to remind me, oh, yes, we do. Remember, you said we were going to meet at that particular restaurant. It would make me feel increasingly more uncomfortable. And remember, if we're uncomfortable, our next behavior isn't usually the best. Another way that we tend to communicate with people normally is to reason. If my husband isn't on board with doing something that I'm suggesting, I know enough not to confront him or argue with him, but I probably try to reason with him to get him to see my point of view. However, if a person isn't understanding language, the more you try to reason, that equates to more words that they don't understand, which would increase their anxiety or agitation. So it just doesn't work. We're going to step through some examples in the next few slides of what to do. Give examples of repeating, accepting, using distraction. Let's take a look. In scenario number 1, you have to get your loved one to a doctor's appointment. However, when you bring that up and you're ready to go, they say, what doctor's appointment? There's nothing wrong with me. The don't, which is a reason, it wouldn't be unlikely or normal to say, you've been seeing the doctor every 3 months. It's on your calendar. I told you yesterday. But remember, if the person doesn't remember that they had that appointment, and again, you're using more words here, they would probably get more agitated and push back even more, saying again, what doctor's appointment? There's nothing wrong with me. Some alternatives are to maybe just give them a short explanation. It's just a regular checkup. Or you may just accept the blame. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you. That way it'll diffuse the argument and you just try to redirect, or you could try to distract them. Say, you know what? There's that great ice cream parlor right by the doctor's office. How about let's stop for ice cream on the way back? All 3 of these things may render a better outcome. Will they work in all cases or all the time or even work at all? Maybe not, but you're setting yourself up for a greater chance of success if you can practice these ahead of time. Scenario number 2, don't argue. If you're going over your loved one's finances or bank statement and you find a check for $500 that flags your interest and you bring it up to them, they could get argumentative. Say, I didn't write this check for $500. Someone at the bank is forging my signature. It would be easy and natural to respond, what? Don't be silly. The bank wouldn't be forging your signature. But remember, if they don't remember that they wrote that check for $500, they would probably be feeling very uncomfortable. So it's best to respond to the feelings. That's a scary feeling. You might also try a reassuring approach. I'm sorry if I forgot to tell you about that $500, fully knowing that you're not going to get them to remember that they wrote that check for $500. And if you continue to push the issue, it's more likely to end in an argument. Distracting could also work in later stages of the disease when the person's not able to stay focused. You might say, you know what? Could you help me over here fold these towels? I really need some help. Come on over here. It may be just enough to distract them and get them on a different frame of thinking. Scenario number 3, don't remind them that they forgot. If your loved one says, Joe hasn't called for a long time, and you knew that they just talked to them yesterday, it would be very easy to say, Joe called yesterday and you talked with him for 30 minutes. How would that make them feel? They would probably feel really agitated and upset that they didn't remember. And plus, no one likes to be made to feel that they don't know what they're talking about. An alternative approach to reassure and distract might be, you really like talking to Joe, don't you? Why don't we call him when we get back from our walk? A couple things might happen. You may be able to distract them so that that person doesn't remember that you're going to call them and may lose track of the fact that they really want to talk to him. Or you can simply call that person when you get back from your walk, but the agitation will be taken care of. Scenario number 4, don't question recent memory. You walk in with a longtime friend next to you, and your loved one says, I see you've brought a friend with you. Who's this? It would be very easy to just immediately respond, Mom, don't you remember? You've known Eric for years. An alternative might be to give a short explanation and redirect. Don't assume that she's going to remember who this person is. Instead, say, Hi, Mom. This is Eric. We work together. Would you like to go on a walk with us? Another scenario is how not to take it personally. And this one is one of the toughest. And I just want to emphasize that although I'm going through this example, I don't want to make anyone feel that this is easy. Oftentimes in the disease process, someone will lose memory back to a part of their history where they weren't married. Therefore, they don't recognize a spouse. Or they may have lost memory back to a time when their spouse looked quite a bit different. Their husband is not that gray-haired man standing in front of them. He's that handsome young guy in the photo with a full head of black hair. So, for example, if this happens and the wife said, Who are you? Where's my husband? It would be very easy to take that personally and say, What do you mean, who's your husband? I'm your husband. Instead, recognize that she doesn't know or is very alarmed and wondering who in the world is this gentleman in my house that I don't recognize, and she's filled with fear. An alternative may be to go with the flow and reassure. He'll be home for dinner. You could perhaps distract and say, How about some milk and cookies? Would you like chocolate chip or oatmeal? That may seem very strange, but remember, when a person's brain is impaired with Alzheimer's dementia, it's very easy to redirect them, and they will respond to a positive tone of voice and positive body language. The last scenario we're going to take a look at is something substituting the use of nevertheless for but. If someone says, for example, I'm not eating this, I hate chicken. It would be very easy at the end of a long day when you've prepared dinner for the two of you to say, I know chicken's not your favorite food, but it's what we're having for dinner. Instead, substitute the word nevertheless. Psychologists have shown that the use of the word but unconsciously puts us all on the defensive, knowing that there's going to be a confrontation and that the person is not on our side. Substituting nevertheless, change the phrase, I know chicken's not your favorite food. Nevertheless, I'd appreciate it if you ate just a little, and keep the positive flow of conversation going. You could say, because after that, I've got your favorite, some vanilla ice cream, and then we're going to go for a walk, honey. Here, come on, take just a couple bites. You'd be more likely to come out with a different outcome. If there's changes in the behavior of someone's behavior, go into detective mode. Remember that based on the changes in their brain that we discussed earlier, they may not be able to understand what's causing them physical discomfort, and they're not able to meet that need for themselves or change the situation. So oftentimes, if they're feeling agitated or fidgety, it's because there's a physical problem. Ask yourself, when's the last time they've eaten? Could they be thirsty? Do they need to use the restroom? Has the room become too hot or too cold? Are they in pain? Check for body language. Are they grimacing? Is there any expression of pain on their face? Are they clenching a certain part of their body? Thinking about if we've eaten a big meal and we get uncomfortably full, we may have to loosen our pants. Could that be happening to your loved one? Are they just not feeling well? Think if you had a headache and couldn't take an aspirin, it would feel so uncomfortable. Kind of go through, develop a mental checklist. I do want to emphasize, though, that if there is a drastic behavior change overnight, oftentimes it can be a medical condition, so be sure to consult a physician. Some other helpful hints are to ask yourself, if there's changes in behavior, what was the behavior? Was it harmful? Unfortunately, this disease is changing the person's cognitive abilities, and there is going to be some changes in behavior. And if a person is doing something that's not harming themselves or others, it may be more comfortable for them to continue to do it. For example, rummaging is a common behavior when someone is in moderate stage Alzheimer's. The person is going through their things, kind of reassuring themselves that they know where their things are, that these are their things, they're things that are special to them. So it may not be a problem if you let them continue. Instead, you can actually bring them some of the things that they really treasure so they can actually continue to touch things that are important to them. If there's a behavior that's a little more problematic, remember that three-step model. That confusion can trigger uncomfortableness, which can trigger a behavior. Think backwards to figure out what could be triggering this behavior. What happened immediately before that change in behavior? Also, many times, unfortunately, as a caregiver, we're the ones that can be triggering some of this behavior based on how we're reacting to them. Remember that our nonverbal communication largely trumps our choice of words. So make sure that you're not doing something that could be triggering fearfulness or agitation. Remember to remain calm, responding to feelings. Reassure that person. If you can make the person feel comfortable, they'll feel safe with you, and a lot of their agitation will go away so that you can, you can work through the problem and try to figure out what that person needs. Join the person's reality. It's not so important to be right. If your loved one looks up at the moon and says, "The moon is so green," you know that that's not true. But instead of trying to correct the person, join their reality and say something like, "That is a beautiful shade of green," or "Wow, I've never noticed that before." Ask yourself if it's necessary to correct that person. It may become necessary to remove yourself as long as the person's in a safe spot and won't injure themselves or do something that will cause a problem, and return later. It gives both of you a chance to reset. Something that is consistent about dementia is that people do forget, and a few seconds later won't remember. That being the case, if you find yourself getting increasingly agitated or frustrated, just stepping away, even going to the restroom, someplace where you can count to 10, take a deep breath and refocus, and then coming back could be helpful to you both. Lastly, remember that communication abilities change and evolve throughout the disease, so that this means that you will have to become increasingly flexible. And what worked before might no longer work, so that you'll increasingly have to find new ways to connect to that person. I wanted to end this presentation with a quote from Maya Angelou. "I've heard that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Caregiving is a tough job, and you're trying so hard to say the right thing and do the right thing. But most importantly, it's how you make that person feel. And this disease can take away a lot of things from a person, but it never takes away the person's need to feel loved, to feel a sense of purpose, and to feel that they belong. And those are the most important things that you can bring to that person as this disease progresses. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask and reach out to the Villages Learning Center. Thank you.